Good afternoon. It is afternoon. I'm conscious of two challenges. I stand before you in lunch, and I have spoken at many summits. Just a very quick hands up. Who's heard me speak at a summit before? There's a challenge. I have to do, therefore, something new in this. And I hope I can add to what other speakers have said and give you some actual research and a case study that might build on that knowledge. As you can see, my title, How to Keep Your Job in an AI World, with a focus on evaluation. We all know we're living in a radical time. It's now been described as the fourth industrial revolution, with a focus on intelligence. Now, of course, if we were talking about the political world, we'd probably refute that and say there's probably a lack of intelligence. But certainly, I want to talk about human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So sort of in overview, I want to talk about the rush to automation, because that's what AI is all about. It's automating processes where we can take manual tasks out of it. And it's built on cyber optimism on one hand, this great passion, belief it's going to be better and it's all going to be great. But at the same time, there's fear and there's concern about machines replacing humans. And actually, back in 1964, a guy called Leo Marx, no relation to Karl Marx, wrote a book called The Machine in the Garden, 1964. And that was really about the garden, was alluding to the Garden of Eden, to nature, the human world, and the machine that was disrupting it. And he was it was an attack on technology, disrupting society. That was 1964. So these concerns have been around for quite a while. So what I want to do is sort of unpack the journey as we go from information and data into insights, which we all talk a lot about. Insights giving us understanding, that informing decision-making, and then finally, hopefully, leading to action. And I want to trace through the machine intelligence and the human intelligence relationship along that trajectory. Now, I'm going to do it through a case study, and this is a case study that I've been deeply involved in because it's my own university. And I'll take you through this case study. A little bit about the University of Technology, Sydney. Over 4,000 employees, over 50,000 students. So we're talking a fairly large organisation. And right away on the screen, I think you'll see the problem. In 2024 and 2025, we had $1.3 billion annual income. We had $1.4 billion annual operating expenditure. We're losing $100 million a year. And in 2 years running, so it was described as a structural deficit. And we're also carrying a $300 million debt, mainly arising out of COVID. And so the university leadership, in its wisdom, as any organisation would come up with a plan, we have to cut $100 million out of our operating costs. So I'm going to zero it in onto one faculty, and I'll tell you why. Because part of the restructuring was that we merged 2.5 faculties. A faculty is like a division, for those who don't know. And just running through what was merged here, to give you an idea of the diversity, a lot of these things you would see as things we know, media and journalism and advertising and PR, but also architecture, building, international studies, including all language training, high school and primary school teacher education, social and political sciences, all put together into one faculty. Right? Fairly diverse. So what we named it the Faculty of Design and Society, and what we see is enormous diversity, a lot of duplication there, so there was need for restructuring because we had 2 research offices and 2 teaching and learning offices and 2 lots of, Noah's Ark almost. And we had a dean of this faculty, and all of a sudden in June 2025, the dean left the position suddenly overnight. And we don't even know where he went. These things happen. And I was asked, would I step into the position as interim dean? Now, being stupid, I said yes, because all hell was breaking loose, and I'll show you some of the things that were happening. And so I'm doing this case study from 2 perspectives. One, I was a CEO of one of the divisions, but the other job I was given, because I'm a communication person, was that I was put in charge as the chair of the whole university's consultation committee, they called it. And that was to advise them on how do we evaluate and track and improve and fix what we're doing. So in evaluation terms, we're talking about change management. 3 objectives: achieve the target savings. That was mandatory. We had to hit the savings, or we were going to be in financial trouble. We had to, therefore, to hit those savings, gain staff and stakeholder. Now, I know staff are stakeholders, but I just wanted to separate external, and I'll talk about them in a moment. We had to gain staff and stakeholder support for the change. And as you'd appreciate, we had to protect the brand and maintain key stakeholder relationships. And those objectives are all very important. Now, the plan that I inherited, bearing in mind I stepped into the job in August, this is what the university decided it would do just in this one faculty. It had 5 schools. We're going to cut 5 schools to 3. By do that, we're going to merge 2 schools, and then we were going to propose to close international studies completely. That meant all international studies and close all education training completely. 65 academics identified immediately to go just in those areas, closing 104 subjects, courses, 417 subjects, and in this faculty alone, target of $11 to $12 million savings. Now, okay, that's the plan, and I'll talk about how that plan came about in a moment, because AI was used in developing it. But just to talk about the environment and the context of which something we would look at as communicators, this was proposed to happen in an organisation that is a public university, meaning we are largely government funded. We're not an organisation with shareholders and operating on pure profit principles. That means we've got obligation to society. We have 460 employees, and you saw some of the disciplines on the screen: arts, humanities, political scientists. These are the activists of the organisation, left-leaning, fierce, rebellious, etc. And we have a very active union. All of the representatives are in this faculty. Right? You sort of see, if you're doing a bit of environmental scanning, you'd kind of think, wow, who invented that plan in red? Oh, and sorry, the other important thing, the whole university had over 100 really important partners and stakeholders. High schools, for example, because we were teacher education. Every high school in the country was a key partner. And we were going to wipe out teacher education. But also donors and government. So I draw attention to the Department of Education, part of the New South Wales government, with which we have a major partnership. We were going to wipe out something that they were concerned about. So evaluation 101, what happened? Of course, we had media monitoring. Immediately, the media went crazy on the education cuts. We were getting a hammering. But not just that, you'll see in the top centre, Safe Work New South Wales is an industrial body with enormous powers. It can stop building sites, it can shut down plans. They turned up on site and ruled that our process was unsafe. It was causing psychological harm, and we had to stop everything. So we had the Safe Work New South Wales. We had a vote of no confidence in the Vice-Chancellor, which made headlines. Chaos was reported, but it kept getting worse. Fair Work Commission is an industrial court. We were taken to the industrial court not once, not twice, 3 times in 2 months, with major legal costs. And at the top, you'll see a heading about Australia's Asia capability, and in the centre, an acronym, DFAT. That's the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. A major federal government department stepped in and said, because our language courses are all double degrees. You do a language and business, a language and engineering. And the Department of Foreign Affairs stepped in and said, this is going to be disastrous for Australia's competitiveness in our region. So we've got the federal government, the state government, and then to make it worse, in the bottom right, as you look at it there, job cuts probe, the New South Wales Parliament ordered a parliamentary inquiry into university management. So we're in the Industrial Commission. We've got Safe Work New South Wales on campus. Oh, and of course we have protests on campus. I have to walk in the morning between placards and protesters. And we've got a parliamentary inquiry happening. In a nutshell, the place is on fire, all right? Metaphorically, but it felt like it was real. So coming to evaluation, how did we get there and what did we do? The formative evaluation and the data collection, the first initial data collection was economic analysis. I don't want to say too much about this company, KPMG, but they did all of the analysis that informed the initial plan, and they used AI. They didn't talk to anybody, much that I know of. I certainly didn't talk to anybody, but they looked at profit, loss, courses that were losing money, etc., and came up with the plan that was based purely on economic principles, and that's what the university adopted. Then, of course, we've got media monitoring, media content analysis, things you'd expect. We had over 600 submissions from students, from staff, from outside, from government bodies, 600 submissions, mostly opposing what we were doing. So how do you analyse 600 submissions? Some were 25 pages long. So I commissioned, the part we did is to commission independent text analysis of these submissions so we could get a sense of them. And we used an AI tool, but we didn't use ChatGPT. There was a lot of protests of the staff for us using AI, so we used a lesser tool. It was still machine learning AI tools. And of course, there was management analysis. What did we learn from evaluation 1.0? Media analysis? You didn't have to look at I just showed you a couple. We had over 500 clips in 2 months that were all disastrous. And the independent text analysis, this was interesting. We had questions about the AI analysis of KPMG, which I won't say much about because you may have heard some reports that they even wrote some of their reports, not KPMG, some of the management firms wrote their reports using AI. I don't know, that's been in newspapers in a few countries. But the independent text analysis actually pretty much told us what we already knew. We analysed all the submissions, we knew the themes, they were in our face every day. The key thing is what they didn't tell us is what should we do. And this is where I'm starting to lead toward what machines can tell us and what humans have got to do. Because here we were with all this bad news, we're getting it from all sides, what do we do? And there was no AI tool that was going to tell me that. So process evaluation, and I want to just dig into the nitty-gritty of evaluation a bit here just to unpack a point I want to make. In process evaluation, on the left-hand column, I've just sort of said, what is it? Well, that's when we produce stuff, we distribute stuff, and we want to reach audiences in the process. And there's some examples of what it might be. When we took an evaluation, if you bring it down to its most basic sense, what are we doing? We're actually just asking some questions. Yeah? Were the outputs produced on time? A bit more detail. Was the planned content distributed? Did it reach the target audience? And more importantly, how many people potentially saw the content? And even more importantly, I've bolded a few questions that I'd like to know. Was it relevant and appealing to the audience? Was adequate information provided? And were the recipients satisfied with the information? These are the kind of things we evaluate. And when you think about that, all they are is questions. I put it to you, evaluation is probably nothing much more than asking questions. The bigger, other overarching question, of course, is can machines answer those questions for us, or do we have to answer some of them ourselves? When we get to a results evaluation, it's important to recognise that communication comes in a number of forms. And it's important to remind ourselves of this. It's to inform, yes, that's one thing. It's to persuade sometimes. But communication is also about interacting and transacting. When we look at things like relationships, for example, it's not just about us telling our story. It's a relationship. Reputation involves partnerships. These involve an interactive form of communication. So in that vein, when I look at how we evaluate results, inform, things like corporate storytelling, did the audience get our information? That's fine. Persuade, did they engage with and did they accept our argument? When we get to things like interact, did stakeholder engagement and satisfaction increase or decrease? Did support for our ideas increase or decrease? And ultimately, was trust and reputation maintained or increased? And were key relationships kept or lost? Now, these are not the only questions you could ask, but I hope you agree these are examples of typical questions we want to know. And again, they're just questions. So in a sense, evaluation is, in its most simple sense, is really asking questions. So it caused me to come up with 4 really simple basic principles for best practice evaluation. Number 1, it's asking questions. We'll talk in a moment about whether machines can answer them or whether there's other ways. But we ask questions, and ideally open-ended questions. There's a place for 1 to 5 scales or 1 to 10 scales, but if you really want to know what people think, you've got to ask open-ended questions. And you'll see why this is relevant in a moment. And then you've got to listen. You've got to really listen open-mindedly. And I like listening in the sense, because this is first-hand data. It's not second or third-hand data that we've gathered through this is first-hand from the horse's mouth, as some people might say. We had a few horses in our midst. And that means including listening to criticism. Then, of course, you record all the data you get. and that's important. And then fourthly, you've got to act on it. And we often miss out on this point, that yes, we can do all the evaluation in the world, but even as a consultant, we still have to act by recommending some action to management. We've got to do something, and particularly in the scenario I'm showing you, I think you'll agree, we had to do something. Do what? So those are 4 principles, and I'm going to come back to them in a minute when we talk about how we use technology. Because just to divert slightly, when we talk about how we ask questions, we all tend to jump to the survey or the basic sort of instrument we might use. But looking in reverse order, one of the most powerful ways to ask questions is actually through collaboration and co-design. When you ask the partners, what do they think you should do? How would you do it? But we tend to often skip over that process. Formal consultation, in fact, our university was mandated to have to do formal consultation, again, where you're asking people to engage in the process and tell us what they think. And then, of course, there's the classic things we use, interviews, surveys, stakeholder engagement. The point I wanted to make here, though, is a lot of evaluation is just talking to people. Just simply sitting down and talking to people. And I'll show you how we used all of those methods in a moment, because we love our structured data. We want our statistics. KPMG gave us lots of statistics, and they caused us to want to just wipe out languages and wipe out education, et cetera, et cetera. They were basically going to destroy our university's brand completely. And then there's unstructured data that we often don't pay enough attention to, but it is that first-hand voice of people, whether it's text from interviews or calls to call centres, submissions to consultations, letters, emails. The famous quote attributed to Albert Einstein, but I don't think that's correct. Don't they say success has many fathers and mothers and failure is an orphan? So everyone claims this, but what can be counted often doesn't count. And what counts often can't be counted. It's important to remember that. And so coming back to my case study, what did we do? Well, here's what we actually did. We went out and talked to people. Me and my colleagues and the executive did 36 meetings with impacted staff in these areas and the leaders of these groups. And often these groups had 8 or 10 people in. We also had weekly Q&A meetings, 1 hour every week with at least 2 faculty executives in. And so in the course of 5 months, this is several meetings a week with the staff impacted. I'll be honest about those meetings, as everyone wanted to ask me. They started out being yelling matches, angry, people wanting to throw things, but slowly they worked into real serious conversations. The other important thing we did is went out and talked to stakeholders. So I went and talked to the Department of Education, and that was really interesting. And this was literally on a telephone the first time, and then getting in a taxi and going downtown and talking to the secretary of the department. And the second, now, UTS, my university, is not a big producer of teachers. We're actually small in the market, which is what KPMG said. So they said, get out of it. When we talked to the department firsthand, they said, yeah, that's true, but UTS does a couple of things that meets a gap in the market. For example, Indigenous teacher education. We're the only university supporting Indigenous teacher education. So the department said, that is critical to our strategy. If you wipe that out, that's going to be a real problem. Is that relevant information? Is that statistics? That, to me, is rich, deep information. We did the same with the Department of Foreign Affairs, and that's how we found out they were really concerned about getting rid of these double degrees, even though they were 5 years long and costing us a fortune. We went to Multicultural New South Wales, came to us because they said, hey, you guys are still teaching languages in a classroom. We teach all of our interpreters and translators and the government with technology, with headphones, far cheaper. They're like, oh, good ideas. So you see where we're heading here. And we listened. And we listened and listened. The Q&A sessions, we recorded them all. We actually captured all of this data, email, letters, protests, as data into our text analysis. And we treated it as data. Qualitative, but it was data. We recorded it all, as I said. And then what came out of it was an alternative plan. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of what I then put forward to the university's leadership, and we finally did have it accepted. One of the things that came out of it was to propose a new UTS Teacher Education Academy. So we weren't going to close down teacher education because the department identified these gaps in the market. And we discussed that with staff and found that about half of our staff in education were aligned directly to these areas of gaps in the market. So we proposed to the university that we do close the school, but we keep 50% of the staff aligned to this specialist teacher education academy, doing things that meet society's needs and meet the government's needs. Now, that still meant 50% of staff there were going to go, but we'll come back to that. Another idea, and by the way, that idea I put forward, but I didn't come up with it. It came from a stakeholder, right? By listening to stakeholders. This idea came from the staff. Because when I told them there was no way we could continue to teach a 5-year double degree to cover languages and teach it in the classroom, I said, it's just no way. It's too expensive. They decided, after a lot of shouting and a lot of machinations over a few months, they decided they could design an entire new international studies degree. Shorter, technology-aided language learning, and only needed 50% of the staff that they had. So this is listening, and this is evaluation. Now, that still meant that there were staff that were not needed, but we then also found by all those meetings with staff that quite a few of them were actually thinking about retiring anyway. And they're a bit pissed off, some of them. So we proposed a voluntary separation and early retirement scheme. Just summarising some of the results, we achieved the staff reductions required to get the cost savings in 2 ways. Through the voluntary separation, we had no forced redundancies. We, with the double degree, by reducing it, we saved $5 million in teach-out costs, because in a university, when you offer a degree and you decide to shut it, you have to teach out all your existing students. 5-year degree meant 4 years of teach-out. That was a cost of $5 million. It was going to be more than the savings we made. So somewhere along the line, KPMG had not done a really good job. Staff satisfaction and trust increased. Now, trust, I have to be honest, trust is still a work in progress, because having announced that initial plan, you can imagine trust among our staff and our students went very low, and it's going to take a while to rebuild. It has picked up a little, but staff satisfaction went from, on an NPS rating of like 1, to being passionate about the new Teacher Education Academy, the new International Studies degree. In fact, before I flew to Ireland, I was invited to a function with the International Studies staff to celebrate their new proposal for a new degree. So satisfaction's picked up, and of course you can imagine our external partners, the Department of Education, the New South Wales government, far more happy. We've had numerous, I didn't need to do a survey, we had letters of congratulations coming in from departments. Let me then go back to my 4 simple principles and just how that relates. Asking questions. Of course, we can ask questions digitally. We use e-surveys and all sorts of instruments, so I'm totally for that. But there is no substitute sometimes for asking questions as a human, talking to people. And what we did in this was a huge amount of just actually talking to people. So I'm prepared to share that with AI and say it's AI, but also we need humans. Listening. Only humans can listen. AI can process the data, record the data, and categorize it and do all sorts of things, but humans have to listen all the way up through management. And we have to provide them with data to cause them to listen. And by the way, that listening, it's not just about hearing. Listening is about interpreting data, and it's about contextualizing data. You know, it was getting in a taxi and going downtown and talking to the Department of Education. It was bringing in extraneous data into what the data was on the table through listening. So that's a human process. When we come to recording responses and analysing data, absolutely. I love my data tools. Digital and advanced AI tools can do that for us. But then finally, we've got to act on what we're learning and what we're finding. And again, the machine ain't going to do that for us. We have to, either us directly or making recommendations and persuasively talking to management, we've got to help bring about change. And so when I look at that fundamentals of asking questions, listening, recording data and presenting data to management to make change, it requires tools, and we should use all the tools available, but it's got a lot of human elements to it. I'll just diverge slightly for some words, wise words that I really like that kind of relate to this. Some of you will know David Ogilvy was the founder of Ogilvy Advertising. And a young copywriter came to him in New York office one day and asked him about, what's the right words to really get through to people? How do you really communicate? And if you read one of David Ogilvy's books, here's what he said. Get on a bus and go to Iowa. Stay on a farm for a week and talk to the farmer. Come back to New York on a train and talk to your fellow passengers in coach. Then you'll know the words to use. Right? And I think that's something we're in danger of. We must embrace technology, but we're in danger of dropping out of human communication. And here's one I got from a farmer just recently. AI systems in my truck can tell me when a tyre is flat. Can't get out and change the bloody tyre. Right? So to return to my theme and my title, tools have been used by humans for 2.5 million years. And we'd absolutely be foolish not to embrace the latest tools and use them. Tools have actually distinguished what Homo sapiens, modern humans, are about, whether it's from stone cutting to laser cutting, the abacus to AI. Digital tools are fantastic at data collection, data storage, data processing, and many areas of automation. And AI is a progression of that trend. But to translate the literal meaning of Deus ex machina, God is not in the machine. The machine is not God. And there's several reasons for that. Rob Key will talk about this better than I can, but quality outputs from AI require quality inputs. There is a whole lot of human work to be done with AI. Removing biases, checking data, as we just heard Greg talk about, where is that data even coming from? Because if it's coming from Reddit, I don't know about you, but I've read a few forums in Reddit, and I've read a lot of crap. Right? The ethics of AI. And we're at a critical turning point. Greg also talked very eloquently about the content of AI and the potential for what we might call PR or what we call corporate communication having an enormous influence, potentially. But ethically, how will we use that? Because there's two ways to approach GEO. One is we check it and we make sure what our social responsibility, we make sure what we're putting in there is accurate and truthful, ethical. Or, as some people are saying, GEO is a way to feed the beast, to feed out propaganda, to push our brands. And I think that we need to think about where we land in history, in which way we go with GEO, because I think public relations, corporate communication is at a real crossroads there. We want to be on the right side of history. So I want to start to bring this together and remind ourselves that we're in communication. And just for a moment, think about that word communication and what it is, because I often do this to my students, and sorry to inflict it on you, but it comes from the Latin communis, the noun communicatio, communication, communicare, the verb. And in all Germanic languages, not in some other languages, the word communication comes from this Latin root. And it doesn't mean putting out stuff. It actually means sharing, exchange, interchange. That's communication. So why am I telling you this, and why am I going back to that basics? Because if we think we're in content, if we think content is our business, AI can produce it faster and better in many ways than we can. We think content that AI works for us. Actually, increasingly, we will work for AI because we'll be putting the finishing touches on it or something. And I'm not just talking about text. I was working with a photographer recently on a brief, and we needed a photograph of a blue sky with certain trees. And in the old days, when I worked in an ad agency, we'd have to get in a couple of four-wheel drives and we'd go out to the countryside somewhere and we'd have a photo shoot. We'd charge the client $30,000 to get a photo. And the guy produced it in AI in 2 minutes. Perfect photo. Right? So content is important, but if we think content is king, we won't have a job in future. If we think our job is information, the world is awash with information, and AI tools and modern tools can store it, process it far better than we can. If we think we're in data, AI's already eaten our breakfast. Right? This is where we should be. Right? This is where communication happens. This is where understanding and shared views occur or don't. This is where trust exists or doesn't. This is where relationships exist or don't. This is where customer satisfaction exists. This is where perceptions are formed, like reputation and so forth. This is a human side of communication. And so it depends on what we're doing. We're in danger of, we must embrace AI, but we're in danger of trying to do communication the way the American military fight wars at 30,000 feet, automated with algorithms to tell them when to push the button in the aircraft to drop the bomb. But in military warfare, even since the 14th, 13th century, we've known that it's not only about seizing ground, it's about holding ground. And you can't do communication from 30,000 feet. We do have to get down and messy and talk with humans and deal with cognition, deal with emotions and all of those things. And by the way, AI does synthetic emotions, but AI does not read emotion and does not produce emotion. It strips it out. So to sort of summarize, I've really tried to deliver two types of messages here, and it's a danger of mixing metaphors, but I've talked about evaluation. If we think about it in its core principle, it's asking questions. And yes, we can ask some of those questions in digital forms, but at the end of the day, it's often about talking to people and asking questions. And so when I say get down and get messy, why are we so afraid to go out and do an interview? People say, oh, it's too costly. And I talked, and John mentioned the World Health Organization, which I talked about in Miami. And we had to find out there what was working worldwide for WHO. And everyone said, oh, we can't do public surveys. We'll never be able to do that. And we thought, who will know? Leaders of national health authorities, senior medicos will know. We did 22 interviews worldwide with some of the leading healthcare people in the world, and we were able to identify precisely what was working in various countries and what they were throwing in the bin or in the trash can on their computer. And just because they were key stakeholders, really important, and we literally got on the Zoom and talked to them. Use the tools, absolutely. Everything you've heard about AI, we must use this. It is a powerful set of tools, but don't focus on the things that tools can do, which we're in danger of. Data, information, oh, content is king. Bullshit, it's not king or queen. It's just content. It's an important part of the bridges and the roadways to get to communication, but it's not the communication that happens up here in our audiences. So use the tools, but we can't be doing the things the tools do, or that's where we won't have a job in future. Focus on what humans do. And by God, there is things that we really need in this world right now. Empathetic interpretation, contextualization, we've heard that several times, looking at the context, looking at the extraneous data, the data out to the side, whether it's a government department or another stakeholder. Ethical decision making. How will we use these tools? Because we will have to use them. We will have to train models. We'll have to look at biases, etc. We have to know where they're getting the data from, and is it an appropriate source? And we've then got to take action. AI is not going to get out and change the tire for us. So whether we're a consultant or whether we are in-house, we've got to make recommendations and persuasive ways to get management to act. And so all those things require human input. And I think we can argue that right now in the world, we need humanization and communication possibly more than we have in many, many years. And so as much as I love AI and endorse everything that's been said, let's do what humans do. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jim. All right, we have a couple of minutes for some questions. Who would like to take the first question? Great. We have a question right here. I'm not sure where the microphone is, but if you can raise your hand. Thanks.
Thank you. Hey, Jim. Ant from Meltwater, thank you for the talk. And firstly, a comment, kudos on spending more time doing human effort. That's exactly the kind of thing we should have more time to do if AI automates the other tasks. But my question is about what was the impact on the number of student places available and the revenue to the business overall after the cuts?
Well, we're after more students. Part of the financial crisis was bad management, actually, but we depended heavily on international students, and we also depended heavily on one country, China. So you could argue that a lot of this problem was our own fault through management decisions. But before COVID, we had 11,000 international students. Currently, we have 5,300. and they are the high-priced students. So we had lost a lot of students that caused the $100 million deficit to a large extent. So right now we need to increase students, but going out and cutting a whole lot of courses and upsetting all of your staff and upsetting every high school in the country, it's probably not the way to get increased enrolments. And so the problem was economists were looking at economic modelling, accountants were looking at budgets, etc. No one was looking out into the community and the expectations and thinking of where is our brand and where is our ethics and where is our purpose in that longer term. So does that answer your question?
Was it better off revenue-wise afterwards or not?
Well, we've
For the
only...
microphone? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, we, like this alternative plan I presented in December, it was implemented on the 1st of March. So this is right happening now, and we've only just received staff feedback and the letters from government departments. We're going to take a further loss because with the international studies, the new degree, we need a year to develop it. So we're going to take a loss for another year. But when I calculated teach-out costs of the old courses, actually this will break into profit in 27, whereas the previous plan was going to be 2030 before we actually reach profit again.
Great. We have a question over here on the right side.
Rod Cartwright, amazing presentation, Jim. It may be a disarmingly simple question, and you've sort of semi-answered it, but how did the university act initially without first listening, asking, recording and understanding, just in terms of basic human leadership and decision-making? It seems so back to front.
Yeah, well, we're mandated to do consultation, and so the actual merger and the development of the original plan, I arrived in the office of Dean on the 1st of August, and the first thing I did is meet with the executive, which is the Associate Dean of Research and Teaching and Learning, etc. And I found out that 2 of my 4 senior executives had never seen the plan. So, hang on. Senior executives had never seen the plan, so no consultation had been done. It basically took the KPMG data, talked to the senior leadership, and the previous dean said, here's the plan we're going to do. So there had been no talking to people. I asked him why, when he was on holidays far away, in an email, and he said, well, you know, they just would have disagreed, so why bother asking them? You know, that landed us in a shit fight. So that's not, I mean, I think we're all going to work one day, hopefully not, but with management who make decisions like that. It's how do you get out of that? And you could call that a crisis communication project. I just found no substitute for sitting down and listening to people. And I have to say, it's not easy. It's getting messy. I got yelled at. I got called a bastard. I got told to fuck off. People were angry, understandably. And we're telling people their jobs are gone. We're closing your school down, sorry. But they settled, and I kept using one line. I just said, I cannot go to management with vitriol. I know you're angry. I need tools to work with. If you give me the tools to work with, I will fight for you. And I kept saying that, and eventually they started saying, well, how would you do it? How would you restructure international studies? And these are smart people. And after a while, they started to come up with answers. And external stakeholders had answers. And then we collected all that data. We put it into a really good case. We costed it all out. And when I went into the leadership team, I had data. And I beat them over the heads with it.
Next question over here.
Job, always loads to learn from. Sarah Waddington, CEO of the PRCA here.
I know.
Good to see you.
And you're in green, which is very
I
good.
did it deliberately. I can't stay tonight, but I thought I'd get involved. So the question for me is, you talked about management consultancies' involvement, KPMG specifically, but also mentioned about how a lot of those consultants have been using AI for a while now, not particularly brilliantly, and how that's been reported. At the PRCA, we're in this transition where we're trying to get the wider industry towards that higher fee-earning, higher value role of strategic advisor. Is there a world in which you see, bearing in mind what you're talking about here and how the world needs humanisation and communication, where actually management communicators, management agencies have been trying to steal steal the ground that we walk in? Is there going to be a world in which actually the PR function can inhabit that and we don't need those management consultants because we're doing that job ourselves with Futures and Foresight's work, the right data and insights, the right evaluation? That's a big aspiration that we move closer to that and push that encroachment back.
I don't want to make enemies here, but I can't say PR will. because PR is one practice. And if you're talking to government, for example, the UK government won't use the term PR. It's strategic communication. And that's not just semantics. It's because that includes advertising. So my work was evaluating advertising, PR, in-house, internal comms, the whole. But to answer your question, will communication get to that level? I think yes, but we have to do really strategic work. And I couldn't go into a leadership team just with my opinion or rhetoric. I had to gather a lot of data. When we went in, we had verbatim statements from ministers of government. We had parliamentary transcripts of statements in Parliament. We had letters from all sorts of agencies. We had letters from students. So we had a lot of qualitative data, and I had a secret weapon, I must admit. Every faculty has a general manager, and my general manager had a PhD and an MBA in finance. I was very lucky. So he could do all the costings and so make alliances, have financial people. I'm not that good at finances. I can barely balance my own credit card out, but go and get that data. And so every time we had an idea from staff, such as the new degree, bring in this guy, okay, we've got to cost it. How much will it cost? How will we do it? What are the projections, et cetera, cost it out, because management's going to need that. So if we work the communicators with partners, sometimes legal, sometimes finance, yes, but it is a team effort. And I'm acknowledging this was a success story, but there are a lot of players in it. And in the end, I was the guy who presented it, but the ideas came from our stakeholders and our staff. And we weren't listening to them. Up the back, there's one.
Great. Is it Patrick?
Yeah, Padraig McKeown, a consultant here in Ireland and Dublin City University. Is it too simplistic, Jim, to say that AI is a poor tool when you're dealing with soft power?
I think AI look, it's one of the most powerful tools we've ever had in human history, but it's like all tools. You know, you don't get a shovel to go and mow your lawn. You've got to use the right tool for the jobs it can do. And AI is extremely powerful if you know, I use AI fully to analyze submissions to government because I'm not using a language model, whether it's Claude or what, I'm using the database of actual submissions. And it used to take me 3 weeks to analyze, say, 4,000 or 5,000 submissions. The last one took 26 minutes. Right? So AI is this powerful tool that does certain things really, really well. But like all tools, you've got to control it. You don't get on a backhoe and go driving down the road and dig up the first bit of ground you find. You're likely to dig up a power cable. So you need expertise in the tool. So I'm totally pro AI as a tool, but it is a tool. And anyone who uses tools has got to be expert in using those tools. Even a handsaw, you can cut your hand off with it. So we need to be expert at using the tools. And I think at the moment we're in this dangerous period, as I said, where I worry that a lot of our industries want to fly at 30,000 feet and do communication and let algorithms do things and take the glory. No, human communication is a messy business. As I said, I got yelled at in meetings. We had contested ideas, people argued, but out of it comes a consensus, or at least some level of consensus of what people want, and you do it, and then you get the support. And in the process, even it's cathartic. People worked out their frustrations, and I finished up going to a function and everyone's saying thank you and celebrating a change that a few months before they were ready to go to war over.
Brilliant. Round of applause for Jim Macnamara, please.